We are being joined live by our guest, Alexis Poulet, a journalist and co-founder of Le Monde Moderne from Paris. Thanks
Hello.
for joining us.
Thank you. Hi.
So I hope you've had a look at the declaration.
Yes.
Right, so I have to ask my first question on that. Consensus has been reached at the G20. The Delhi Declaration has been adopted with a focus of inclusivity. What do you make of this?
I mean, it's quite a diplomatic achievement for India to have such a declaration adopted by all world leaders on day one of the summit. So clearly it shows that there was a lot of work prior to this meeting by the Indian diplomatic corps. And of course, a lot of talks have been going on between each of these meetings. We know Prime Minister Modi has been visiting a lot of countries also before this meeting, talking one-to-one with world leaders. So I think it's clearly an achievement and a long work that has paid for India to be a leader for the global South and for international diplomacy as we've seen it today.
Absolutely. Alexis, you mentioned that this is a huge diplomatic win for India, which is playing host to the summit. Now, as we know, Russia has skipped the summit. The declaration does not mention Russia as an aggressor, yet the language has been agreed upon. What's your view on that?
Well, I think it's clearly part of this diplomatic achievement is not to be in front of Russia and clearly naming Russia for what's happening in Ukraine, but saying that using the force to gain territory is not acceptable part of the UN agreement within all countries. So India is clearly the middleman to discuss with all the parties and not to be part of one or the other camp, but saying that a peace agreement should be achieved for the world good, mainly because of course, the grain agreement. The shipment of cereal is very important for Africa, Europe, and the rest of the world, but also to end a massacre that should come to an end with diplomatic means and not with weapons. So again, I think it took months of work that is invisible now, but to achieve this wording and make sure that the UN is paramount and the international world peace can be preserved.
Right, Alexis, how significant is the gathering of the G20 at a time when the world is so divided due to the war? Now, we talk of allies and alliances at this point, and at a time like this, to get a declaration out is a diplomatic win. But what does it say about the G20 summit at large?
I think it says that the world is now clearly multipolar, and the BRICS before in Johannesburg this summer, we've seen also the power of India, China, Russia, and all the non-aligned countries as they were called before. But now we can say that there are many different world that makes world together. So what can bring the G20 is different views on the world. When we get out of the Pax Americana, was one country was the world leader somehow to certain extent, was the United States of America wanted to be the only one ruling the world with world sanctions and the view session ideology of the world. This is clearly changing very rapidly, because we can now see that India has a different view on the world. India is a world champion, is also a space champion with the mission to the moon, and also that other countries have different views on the world and they have to discuss. It can be just one vision for all. It doesn't work. And what says the G20 is that now I think the US has understand they don't want to go with a war with Russia or a war with China, and they have to now make with this world where a lot of superpowers are emerging, and they are to count with, and they are very important.
Right, Alexis, India is a world champion. That's certainly a headline. Stay with us on this broadcast. I'd like to pick your brain about some more developments. For now, let's go across to our correspondent Bhairavi, who has been getting us live updates from the G20 summit since yesterday, in fact. Bhairavi, the joint declaration is out. Consensus has been reached despite all the concerns that you had flagged yesterday. This, of course, is a huge diplomatic win for India. Tell us more.
There was a lot of worry about whether there could be a consensus on the joint communique, whether there would be a joint communique, but clearly this has been a huge win for India. As Amitabh Kant, the Indian Sherpa himself, said at the press briefing just a short while ago, he said this has a huge India footprint, and this has been the most ambitious presidency of all presidencies at the G20. Let me just point out exactly what was said. They said that there were 8 paras on geopolitics, 83 paragraphs on the overall situation, the economy and so on. All countries have unanimously supported all paragraphs and all pages of the joint communique, is what the government is saying. And also adding that not any chair statement or dissent note or footnote was given to the joint communique, the draft of that, as was being, spread, and worries were and concerns were about the fact that there wouldn't be consensus given the fault lines between the East and the West as far as the Russian war is concerned. But careful handling of the situation, Priyanka, the fact that Russia is not mentioned by name in that joint declaration by all countries in itself is a victory, and that's why possibly Russia is on board with this declaration. At the Bali summit, remember, there were clear indications about the Russia-Ukraine war, and Russia was also mentioned. Here it of course says that concerning the war in Ukraine, while recalling the discussion in Bali, we reiterated our national positions. We reiterated our national positions and resolutions adopted under the UNSC, and underscored that
in fact,
all
India's
states,
foreign minister,
all I say here, must act in a manner consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN.
Absolutely. A very valid point raised by you. In fact, just moments ago, India's foreign minister clearly said that Bali was Bali, New Delhi is New Delhi, when talking about referring to mentions of the Ukraine war in the declaration. Going back to you, Alexis, a journalist who's here with us from Paris, let's talk about the African Union. It has been included as a G20 member. What does this mean for the bloc and for the G20 grouping? We've had an African official on WION say that this summit has set a standard for inclusion going forward.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what I was saying about the world being multipolar, and understanding that it can be a few superpowers talking to each other. The fact that there was the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, Africa, of course, is clearly moving from neo-colonial policies to a new independent move, and also a new need for democracy and international voicing, because a lot of African countries like Mali, Niger, and others understand that they have to play a key role in international diplomacy, with, of course, the resource they have in the ground, but demography and a lot of stake that they actually are happening in Africa. So it's an important message, and it's an important step toward a more inclusive world and toward more dialogue, and I hope a more sustainable peace for all the countries in the world.
Right, Alexis, thank you so much for all your insights, and thanks for joining us on WION. Bharat, you're still here with us on this broadcast. Tell us a little bit about climate change and the policies that have been mentioned in the declaration. We had the G20 Sherpa mention clearly that this is the most ambitious document on climate action. There are country-specific solutions for climate change. Tell us more on that.
Right, absolutely, Priyanka. As we were pointing out, that climate mitigation is an important agenda of Prime Minister Modi, and it was reiterated again in the joint declaration and the draft resolution of that at this G20 summit. And this is clearly something that the Americans also want to work with India on, as well as the European Union. There are widespread plans on sustainable development goals that can be achieved in the next 1 year itself, and have been particularly when it comes to the emerging economies. The other issues, of course, were highlighted even before the joint resolution, were coming pretty much in line with what we have been reporting, that is more funding to the multilateral development banks, and agreement on making them more effective and more inclusive. And also, talking about climate financing and promoting digital public infrastructure, and of course talks on sustainable development goals and having a 10-year plan for that as well. These are some of the issues, and of course the most important issue in the business line being the regulatory framework for crypto assets, which is something that India has worked very closely with the IMF. The Indian FSB has worked with IMF over the last 1 year to regulate the cryptocurrency currency framework as well. So these are things that we've been talking about and were brought to the table, and there's been broad consensus on that as well.
Bhairavi, thank you so much for all those inputs. We'll come back to you again as further bilaterals continue and more announcements come from them. Thanks for joining us on WION.